Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining me and tuning in. My name is Francesco Polizzi. I am a rising junior computer science major at Lindenwood University in St. Charles, Missouri. I've spent the last 11 and a half weeks as an intern on the Firefox growth team here at Mozilla. And so I'm going to talk today a little bit about what I did, some of the tangible results that we saw from my internship, and then how I learned that marrying growth data and privacy on the web is equally difficult and important thing to do. So let's start off with talking a little bit about what the growth team does and who comprises the growth team. So a general member of the growth team is really like a Swiss Army knife type of person with a breadth of different abilities, three of which are listed here. So generally, a growth person has some analytical knowledge, some marketing knowledge, and some engineering knowledge at some depth. What we focus on as a group is acquisition, which is getting users in the first place, activation, which is making sure that those users are using our product, and then retention, which is tied into the other two things, and that's making sure that users are activated on our product for a long period of time, that they stay with us, and that they don't churn. So what does that look like on a daily basis? This is our general workflow of what we normally do. So we have three different places that we gather information from to make hypotheses. One being Google Analytics, which is where we get all of our web analytics from. So across all the websites that Mozilla owns, we gather web analytics. Then we have two systems for in-product analytics. The first being FHR, or Firefox Health Report. That's an opt-out system in Firefox, and then telemetry, which is an opt-in system in Firefox. And so we gather all of this analytic data about how our users are using our product, how they're interacting with our web pages, and we draw insights from those and make hypotheses about how we can better acquisition, activation, or retention in some way. And then we develop tests. And so we say, who do we want to see these tests? For how long do we want them to run? And we have all of these different things that we do to actually deploy tests. Two systems that we use to deploy tests. One on the web, we use Optimizely. And then in product, we use things called funnel cake builds, which are simply just different build distributions that we give to different segments of individuals. And so we deploy those tests, and then we gather information back through the same channels that we gathered the information in the first place. And then we run a test again, and we gather more information, we run a test again, and we do that iteratively, that sort of rapid development until we have something where we know the ROI is high enough for not only our team, but for product, for engineering, for UX, that we need to move forward, and this will make a tangible difference with activation, acquisition, or retention. And so from there, we will move on to implementing the actual solution. So I'm going to run you through an implementation that I actually did over the course of the summer on AMO. As you can see here, we had two different variations. So we originally gained some insight through Google Analytics that on AMO, there were a lot of people that were getting there that were not on a Firefox web browser. Now, why could that be happening? That could be because you're searching for a specific add-on. Maybe I'm on a different web browser. I Google search an add-on or I Yahoo search an add-on, and I find it, and it links me to Mozilla's website, but I don't have Firefox. That's not very helpful to me because I can only download the add-on if I'm on Firefox. Or maybe my friend sends me a link, and I can't really do much with the page. So in the control, that's actually what the AMO page used to look like for specific add-ons, and it would have a call to action at the top that said, hey, you're not on Firefox, you need to download Firefox to try this. The hypothesis that we had on this page was that the download button is grayed out, people aren't really sure what they need to do here, and we saw that there weren't very many people actually downloading Firefox from this page. So the test that we ran, we had the control and one variation. The variation you can see on the right-hand side, and we just made the download button bigger, we made it green, and we removed the original call to action at the top of the page. So it turns out that this was a win. It actually improved download rate by 800%. This is the dashboard that we see on Optimizely. And so this is something that we found we wanted to implement into production. So this is the small bit of coding that I actually did over the course of the summer. I actually implemented this myself with the help of some AMO devs. And so over the course of the summer, I ran about 10 tests in 10 weeks. Two of them were wins, so two of them we actually ended up implementing into production. And 8 of them are what we call saves. This term I actually heard a couple days ago from the CMO of Optimizely. She came in and she had a presentation to Mozilla internally as part of the CMO speaker series, and she said, losses are not losses, they're saves. And I totally agreed with that, that's why I used it here. Saves, basically, we would have implemented these changes to production if we wouldn't have tested them. And because we tested them and found out that they weren't actually wins in the first place, we saved ourselves. And on top of that, we actually documented them in the future so that we have these insights, and so we know not to test that in the future, and we can base further tests upon those losses or saves. So the 2 wins that I actually implemented to production, it's projected best case scenario over the course of the year that will lead to over 6.6 million downloads annually, which is a number I'm really happy about. I'd like to shout out Matthew, who is on the AMO team. He helped me a little bit with the AMO implementation. And Safwan, who is a high school student in Bangladesh. He's actually a contributor that did the entire Sumo implementation himself, which was really, really cool to be able to work with those two. Not everything that we do on the growth team actually comprises testing, though. So our team is actually only a year old here at Mozilla, and a lot of what we do here is trying to advocate for data-driven decisions across the organization. So one of the biggest projects that I worked on this summer was looking into the Firefox homepage, which is About Home. It's the page that you see here. And so basically there was a projection done in October of 2014 that said that very, very few people, actually a very small percentage of our users actually ever see this page, and that's because they have their default homepage set to some other page. Now that was really concerning to me whenever I heard about it, and that's why I took on this project from a retention perspective. So if you think about it, there are 2 reasons why someone could have a different homepage. One would be that they set it themselves, they chose another experience over ours, which means that they're less engaged with our product, and I would assume that they would not be retained as often. And the second one would be that they were hijacked through some sort of third-party software or a malicious add-on like a toolbar that changed their homepage. And in either case, they're less engaged with our product. With the hijacking case, they're probably having a negative experience. And my hypothesis was that they would be churning more often. Now, what I found with this was that I wanted to gather more information about what was actually happening here, and so that I could validate the work that would be required to actually run a test. And so I wanted to get a telemetry probe out there that would gather some additional information. But what I found was I was challenged more often than I was kind of granted the ability to do so. I was meeting with all of these different people from across the organization, and really what I was hearing was, you're going to have to do this yourself, or About Home is a little bit too political, and I was really finding that this is why, after that projection, that no one really took on the project, and I kind of felt like I couldn't really finish the project. And so I talked to my mentor, Chris, and after all these conversations I had with all these different people across the organization, I said, you know what, I'm just going to retire this project, just like they had done in October and November of 2014, and just document everything that I found, and hopefully maybe someone will pick it up later on that's not an intern that might have a little bit more pull and might be able to do something with this. So after a while, I kind of took my growth hat off, and I looked a lot at the information that I gathered. So I had little bits of information from different people that I talked to, and what I found was that I was looking at this project completely differently than I needed to. And I had enough information that I could actually run a test and gain insight, but because I had this growth hat on, thinking like I need to gain more data and I need to get more insights to validate this, I couldn't really see that everything was laid out right in front of me, that I wanted a lot more information than I needed. So this is something that's pretty typical, I think, of a lot of different growth teams at different organizations. They say, like, we're going to just gather all the information that we can from our users because nobody's making a fuss about it, and then some of it will be valuable to us, and then we'll use that data, and maybe the rest of it will be valuable later on. But here at Mozilla, we're kind of at a different place than most organizations. We're a mission-based organization. We really care about people's privacy. And so that was one thing that I found that was really, really important, that we could still run a test with the information that I had. And that was something that even when I was talking to these people, we weren't seeing. Like, I wasn't seeing, my team wasn't seeing, because we had this thought that like we needed more information to do it, but we didn't. And so how does this really relate to privacy on the web? Well, if you think back to like the .com boom in like the early 2000s, there were a lot of people that were benefiting greatly from the ability for these websites to do really whatever they wanted as far as user interaction goes. So if you think back, like you had your weather, your news, like your email all on one page, and it was all awesome. But then during the .com crash, everyone kind of was taken aback because all of a sudden you'd load your web browser and you'd be bombarded with 4 or 5 pop-ups, and then they didn't like the fact that web pages could interact with the user in that way, and so they switched to Firefox because Firefox had a pop-up blocker. And so now we're kind of seeing a similar thing with privacy, where a lot of organizations are just gathering all the information they can because they think that they have to, and then nobody's really caring about it because, especially millennials like me, it's bettering our lives, or these softwares are making our lives easier. I'm better connected, but we don't see is that what are these organizations going to do with this data if something goes wrong? If all of a sudden there's a downturn in the economy, and so what I really learned, I think the biggest thing that I learned this summer was that marrying growth data and privacy on the web is not something that's impossible. And I think that what we're doing here at Mozilla, like the growth team here, and I guess across the organization, we're having these conversations that no one else in the world is having. There are a lot of growth teams that are gathering information and they're pushing out fixes and they're getting just as many downloads as we are, but they're not doing it in the same sort of organization that we are, and they're not respecting user privacy like we are. And as an organization, if we can continue moving forward and we continue to stay relevant and grow and make data-driven decisions while also respecting user privacy, we'll be doing something that is really, really great, and I think that we will move mountains. And I think that we can definitely do that because we're Mozilla and that's what we do. Thanks for listening to my presentation. If you want to learn a little bit more about what I did this summer and hear about some of the more ridiculous adventures that I went on, you can go to my blog at FrancescoSTL. It's on Medium. Or you can follow me on Twitter, connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm also on GitHub at the same handle. Also, if you're interested in learning about what the growth team here at Mozilla is doing, we're doing some really cool stuff. Just search in any major search engine, Firefox growth team, and you'll find our wiki. So I'll be opening the floor for questions now.
You said that you had everything you needed to run that test. What did you end up doing?
What did I end up doing for the test itself?
Yeah, you said that you wanted to track more, and it became too political, but you still managed to test something with the existing ecosystem. Mm-hmm. How did you do it? What did you do?
So after a long period of time and just staring at the numbers, I took basically the existing infrastructure that we had. So we have the ability to run funnel cake tests, which is just a different distribution, a different build distribution, like I said before. And so we worked with the release management team and got a different build of Firefox going, where we have two different. We had a control and then the variation. And the variation that we had was just to test search volume and then also retention, so usage over time for users that have About Home set as their default homepage versus About New Tab, which was just a random test. We could have really run any change in the homepage and tracked those same two things. But that's what we ended up testing just as a first iteration just to see what the results might be.
Do you have any results?
Not yet. Those are still pouring in. So it takes a lot of time to measure retention because you have to let the data become relevant over time because I guess a lot of people churn pretty quickly in most products, but we've got to wait quite a bit of time before we can actually see that churn over time and see how the change, I guess, affected churn and then also search volume.
So given that you can think of 10 ways of improving growth or retention, 10 fixes to the homepage or the tiles page or a AMO page, how do you convince people to make those changes for you?
Yeah, so that's kind of a difficult question, and that is like one of the more difficult things that we have to do. And so that's why I think that your normal growth person isn't just someone that has their mind set on growth. We really have to see across the organization, is this something, like when we're determining ROI, we have to see, is this something that is worth it not only for me, but is it worth it for the engineers? Is it worth it for the UX people? And can I validate this as something that is going to better the organization and is going to drive us closer to our mission? And usually whenever we can tie those things back to saying, this is going to improve things for our users in privacy or accessibility or web standards or something like that, if we can prove that, then generally we'll get people on board. Not always, but I also think that things are changing at Mozilla and that there are a lot of people that are now really, really focused on making data-driven decisions, and that's a result of just, I think, the whole culture changing and people being more open to accepting the fact that we can respect user privacy and we can also make data-driven decisions and stay relevant as an organization. So it is a difficult thing to do, but it's not impossible. So. All right. Thank you very much.